I've been caught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been taught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been broke.
Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Dove Tusman, and you're back on Equal Footing. We're talking about end of time tonight, end of days, the apocalypse, the messianic kingdom, the heavenly kingdom. In certain faiths, there's resurrection, God's judgment, the last days. These are all words associated with eschatology. Sounds like a dirty word, right? It's not. Eschatology, the study of last things. We'll get into the etymology of it. Get ready for a deep dive across the Abrahamic spectrum. Yes, we're on a Jewish network, but we have non-Jewish listeners too, and we love to learn about religion from a comparative perspective. It helps situate our own belief and helps build bridges of understanding. This is the gateway to a series. We are going to do several shows on the end of times. There's just too much material here. But we're going to start with a primer. We, somewhat tongue-in-cheek in our social media blast, called tonight's program Eschatology 101. The theology of end times in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the Abrahamic faiths. Joined by two subject matter experts and notable gentlemen. Let's start by introducing Dr. Robert Leonard. Dr. Leonard is first time here on Equal Footing. I suspect not the last. Dr. Leonard served for 24 years in the U.S. Army. He was an infantry officer and planner. He's written 3 books on military affairs. You'll see as this series goes on how that connects into eschatology. Dr. Leonard's books on military affairs include Fighting by Minutes, Time and the Art of War, and The Principles of War for the Information Age. After retiring from the U.S. Army, Dr. Leonard joined the principal professional staff of the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory as a national security analyst. In that role, Dr. Leonard wrote Visions of Apocalypse: What Jews, Christians, and Muslims Believe About the End Times and How Those Beliefs Affect Our World. Fascinating and apropos. Weaves through the terrorism that we've lived through here in the United States and Israel and other parts of the world over these last decades. And of course, something that's chatter on the street right now with nuclear saber rattling. End of times. Dr. Leonard is married to Suzanne Leonard, who's the author herself, author of the Goliath Code series, a Christian post-apocalyptic thriller. I'm going to get a little mush mouth tonight. We've got a lot of long words. So the Leonard household are students of the apocalypse and end times from the non-fictional and the fictional side of things. I love it. Dr. Leonard is also a Bible teacher at his church. Dr. Robert Leonard, welcome to Equal Footing. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
You are joined, Dr. Leonard, by Rabbi Yehuda Sherpin. I can't believe, Rabbi, that we haven't had you on the program before. I've had many of your colleagues on before. I'm a fan of your work with Chabad.org. Rabbi Yehuda Sherpin serves as a content editor for Chabad.org, and he's a member of the wonderful Ask the Rabbi team. You got to check this out, whether you're Jewish or not, whether you're observant or not. If you're Jewish, go to Chabad, CHABAD.org, and check out the Ask the Rabbi tool there. You can ask anything. Some of them will get published, others not, but they always respond. It's wonderful, it's engaging, and it's give you real answers to real life dilemmas. Rabbi Yehuda Sherpin has a popular weekly column, as I said, that within that context, it's called Ask Rabbi Why. He has over 30,000 subscribers to that column. Rabbi Sherpin currently serves as rabbi of the Chabad Shul in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, where he lives with his wife and children. He's written on a very wide range of topics in Judaism and Jewish law, including, quite relevant to tonight's topic, a number of articles on eschatology, the study of last things, such as the Jewish view on the apocalypse, and another one called Whether One is Permitted to Calculate the Date of Mashiach's Arrival. Love that. And an additional article called Are the 10 Lost Tribes Coming Back, etc., and so forth. Rabbi Sherpin, welcome to Equal Footing. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm looking forward.
Dr. Leonard, what is eschatology? We're going to be using that word on the program tonight. Eschatology, eschatological. What does this really mean?
Yeah, so it's a big $9 word, but basically it comes from the Greek word eschatos, which means very simply last. And so eschatology is the study of last things, or what we would call the end times. And, if you've never heard the word before, it's quite understandable because in all three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, there are those, sort of sects and denominations that are very close to the literature, to the divine literature, and that part of the religion would most likely be more familiar with eschatology, whereas the parts of the religion that are sort of that don't have necessarily the same regard for the sacred literature, in some cases, would never have heard of eschatology. The example in my life, I grew up in a Presbyterian church. I never heard the term. I never heard any teaching about the end times. It was just never even brought up. But when I went to a fundamentalist Christian church later in life, well, it was very much an urgent topic there, and I, learned a lot about it, there. So that's pretty much the same in all three religions, I believe.
Yeah, one of the things we've learned in our pregame research, and our wonderful producer, Leah, has helped a great deal with this, is that this has gone in waves. I mean, there's a massive focus on eschatology and the end of times around the Maccabean time, what we sometimes call the kind of epic of the rabbis, and the revolt that ends up in the destruction of the Second Temple, etc. And then there's a long period of time in which it isn't kind of at the forefront, and then you have in 19th century a boom in that, both in Christianity and Judaism. I think on our next show we're going to be covering, probably with your help, Dr. Leonard, the kind of political and social implications of this study of end times. But let's come back to the theology, and I can hear our Hindu and Buddhist friends and listeners saying, wait, those aren't the only three religions. Of course not. But you know what? It's facile, both because eschatology is a little bit more formed as an area of inquiry within the Abrahamic faiths. And there's a connection, of course, between these faiths. And it makes it a little easier for the program because it, to some extent, is linear or chronological in terms of the study of end times. And with that, Rabbi Sherpin, I'm going to give it to you because to give us a little bit of an overview of the Jewish view of end times or eschatology, and to help us also frame that as a foundation for Christianity and Islam, because within Judaism we have different strains, don't we, around the theology of end times. We have Ezekiel, we have Isaiah, we have Daniel, we even have the book, of Enoch, which is more recent in our understanding, but certainly contemporaneous historically with the book of Daniel. So can you sort this out for us in general? What's the kind of primer of the Jewish view of end times, Rabbi?
Okay, so as the doctor was saying, in eschatology there's a lot in it, so I think we have to unpack what exactly do we mean, because end of times, there's different times that we are calling end of times. But in the very, very basic, there's many prophecies about the Messianic age, and then there's prophecies that seem to indicate there's going to be wars, Gog and Magog, whoever or whatever those are. And then there's about what's going to be before the Messianic era. So are we calling eschatology the end of days as in the time right before the Messianic era, or are we calling it the Messianic era? Or in the Messianic era, there may be different eras. So that's in general. We have whenever you're talking about this topic, you have to know what we're talking about. But in very, very basic, so the Jewish belief is that right now we're in exile after the destruction of the temple, and we await for the coming of the Mashiach, who will be a person who will gather the exiles and rebuild the temple and then there will commence the Messianic era. Then there will be also a period there will be the resurrection of the dead as part of the Messianic era. Now, the reason why I'm saying it like that, and in very, very general, is because in each one of these things there's actually differences of opinion of exactly how it will look. What does it mean that it will be the Messianic era? Will the Messianic era be, there'll be Mashiach, the temple will be rebuilt, but will the world continue in a natural way, or will be in a supernatural way? When will the resurrection be? Will it be right at the beginning? Will we have to wait a bit? Also, when we talk about eschatology, are we talking about the end as in the Messianic era, or maybe we're talking about after the Messianic era? Maybe there's an era after the Messianic era. That's actually a debate between some different Jewish rabbis. And then getting before that, we have signs of what's going to be going on before the Messianic era.
Now, Dr. Leonard, Rabbi Sherpin is referring to the Messianic era, and this concept of the Messiah, the Mashiach, is shared, is it not, in some way across all three Abrahamic faiths? Can we take a step back and explain for our listeners what the meaning is of Messiah for these three faiths very generally?
Yeah, so in terms of the commonalities, certainly Judaism and Christianity would be very common in their understanding of the age of the Messiah. The difference, of course, is who we think that Messiah is, but we both believe that there is coming a future golden age during which Messiah will rule as a world leader from his headquarters in Jerusalem. I mean, that is essentially shared. On the Islamic side, they have quite a different view, because their view is that the Mahdi will come and rule, and his rule is for a relatively brief period of time, often stated as 7 years, and it's quite different from the Jewish and Christian one. But in Christian terms, we refer to this Messianic age as the millennium, quote unquote, because of the verbiage found in Revelation chapter 20, where it talks about Jesus ruling for 1,000 years. And so we take that 1,000 years, the millennium, as being equivalent to the Messianic age.
And is that post-dating? I think that's the revelation of John in the Christian tradition, right? Where it talks about Satan being in the abyss for 1,000 years. And so
that's correct.
Right. So,
yeah, that's correct.
So how, just before we go back to the rabbi here to help us kind of parse out these different versions of apocalypse, which often predates that, which I want to get to, because listeners are probably wondering, okay, you talked about Doomsday Prophecies. How does the apocalypse connect to the Messianic age? But before we go there, there's a little bit of a wrinkle here within the Christian faith, right, Doctor? Because there, the Jesus figure is already considered a Messiah, and then it's a second coming. Do I understand that correctly? So help us understand that, because in Judaism, it's we're kind of waiting for Mashiach. We're still waiting for the Messiah. But as I understand it in Christianity, maybe Islam, help me out here, there's a version, an interstitial Messiah has already come, no?
Yes. The way we see it is that Jesus is the Messiah, and that he actually appears and intervenes in human history twice. This is kind of foretold for us in, for example, in the Tanakh, in the book of Zechariah, in chapter 9, where in verse 9 it talks about him coming humbly on a donkey, but then in verse 10 it talks of him ruling the nations and sort of dictating peace to the nations, sort of thing. And so we interpret that as meaning that there are two phases to his intervention. The first one happened 2,000 years ago when he came to die on the cross. The second one will happen on a future unknown date when he comes in glory in righteousness to judge and make war and to establish himself as king. And
so for Islam, is that Jesus figure also a Messiah? Sorry to be so naive here. Are there three?
No, it's a great question. Yeah, no, it's a great question, because Islam would tell you that they also believe that Jesus is coming back as an eschatological figure. However, in Islam, he's not coming back as a Messiah or even really a major figure at all. He's coming back just in advance of the Mahdi's appearance, and his job, according to some, is to slay the Antichrist, or what the Islam calls Ad-Dajjal, and he's going to slay him, and then he's going to proclaim to the world, and especially to Jews and Christians, that they were wrong in their interpretations and that Islam is correct. And then he's going to give way to the Mahdi. That's essentially, Islamic eschatology.
So much here. We're gonna take our first break, and we're gonna go back into Jewish eschatology after the break. But before we do that, one last question, Dr. Leonard, and that is the Son of Man reference, which comes from the book of Daniel. That is within the Jewish tradition, but seems to have been very appropriated, if pardon, I hope that's not a triggering word, but used more frequently, perhaps is a better way to say it, within Christianity. Is that Son of Man figure, is that Jesus in the Christian tradition, or is that the second coming of Jesus in the Christian tradition?
Yeah. We consider that a messianic title for Jesus, related most directly to the Daniel prophecy. And of course, that Daniel prophecy is sort of ironic and wonderful, because it's, in that when he's introduced in chapter 7, I believe it is, it's in the court of heaven. I mean, it's in heaven itself. And the last thing you would expect to find there is the Son of Man there. You would expect to find an angel or something, but instead it's the Son of Man. And so this became one of Jesus' favorite titles, one that he used himself during his ministry 2,000 years ago.
We're going to take our first break. We're here with Rabbi Yehuda Sherpin and Dr. Robert Leonard. We're talking about eschatology, the study of last things, end times. We're going to talk a little bit about the apocalypse after this break. We'll be right back. Equal Footing is brought to you in part by Mechanical Art Capital. 3 words. Download the app on your smartphone, your iPhone, or your Android device. Mechanical Art Capital. It's for watch geeks, watch dealers, watch collectors. Do you have a valuable timepiece? Maybe you sell and buy timepieces. Well, get cash for your collection of timepieces or your inventory if you're a dealer without actually selling it. You can actually use a financing program. Mechanical Art Capital offers this program using a buyback contract. It's super easy. It's just a couple pages long. You can review it and execute it within, 20 minutes, and you can get cash from your watch collection or watch inventory basically overnight, max 2 days. You can download the app. You can do it all online. Just snap some pictures of those watches, send them through, and you can get your collection appraised, also free of charge. We can help you on your insurance, etc. Okay, here are the deets. MechanicalArtCapital.com. That's one option online. Again, you can get this on the App Store on your smartphone by putting in these 3 words with spaces in between. Mechanical Art Capital. You can also call if you want to get cash from those watches that you had appraised. You need, whatever it is, to buy more inventory, buy more watches, do an expansion on your house, buy a car, whatever it is. These are for relatively valuable timepieces. Call 833. You can also do this by phone. Call 833-209-0972 for more information. That's 833-209-0972. Operators are standing by. Get cash value from your watch collection or watch inventory from Mechanical Art Capital.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to.
Oy, we're getting flooded here. This topic is of interest, Rabbi, to our listeners. Dr. Leonard, as you know, a lot of our listeners are Jewish, so we're going to be a little bit more inclined towards that side, but it's so important to parse out the language and understand the overall, the panorama, that's the word I'm looking for. Call and participate. I know from already getting some texts that some of you know the number already. If you want to text in a question or comment to Rabbi Yehuda Sherpin or Dr. Robert Leonard on this fascinating topic of end times, you can write to, don't call this number please, just for texting in or iMessaging and WhatsApping in questions and comments to 917-428-4062. That's 917-428-4062. 718-303-4062. If you want to call, hear your voice on the air, and ask a question directly, 718-303-9090. That's the number to call, 718-303-9090. Rabbi Sherpin, let's talk about the apocalypse. I guess I told you I was going to be mushmouth tonight. The apocalypse. And there are a couple, we've already got questions on this. One question, higher order question is, are we as Jews, should we believe in an apocalypse or not? And I want to tell you the second question also because it's a fun one and I want to make sure it doesn't get skipped. Because if your answer to the first one is no, ignore it, that's not a thing, then we don't get to hear your answer to the fun second one, which is, what is the difference between the animal apocalypse and the historical apocalypse, or the apocalypse of weeks? Because we get both of these types of visions of apocalypse in the book of Daniel, Enoch, and elsewhere. So, can you retain those two questions?
Okay, so we'll try. I don't know. We'll try. So first of all, to know what the word apocalypse means. The word apocalypse actually really means, it's a Greek word, it really means revealing, uncovering, which traditionally refers to the revelations and prophecies, which is related to eschatology, which is the ultimate destiny of humanity. That's what the word apocalypse actually means. What the term is commonly used, is about this large-scale destruction and catastrophes that's going to, doom and gloom, what's going to happen at the end of time. So that's how the term is used commonly. So to answer the question whether we believe in the apocalypse, so if referring to the actual real definition, so obviously yes. Referring to the second definition, in other words, how it's commonly used, so there it gets a little bit more complicated. We definitely don't believe in it the same way as other religions would, that it's going to be total destruction, but I'll just take a step back. There's the Talmud. We find an interesting passage in the Talmud, and this would be Talmud Sanhedrin, which is a famous passage. It says, Shish Alf Ishtin Havi Alma. It says that the world will be 6,000 years is the world, and it will be in ruins 1,000. And this is based on what it says in Psalms, that a year for God is Kelef Shanim, is like 1,000 years. So it's going to be so the last 1,000 years, 1,000 Chad Charuf, 1,000 is going to be ruins and destruction. Now the question is, what exactly does that mean? And before we even get to what that means, the Talmud actually says that, because the Talmud brings another opinion that's for 2,000, and then the Talmud says no, it's going to be 1,000. It's just like we have a sabbatical, a cycle of 7 years, and the 7th year is Shemitah, it's a sabbatical year, and the sabbatical year, so it cleans off all the debts that you had. So too, we have 6,000 years, and then the 7,000 years is like the sabbatical year, which cleans off the debt, and it's like a day that's Mizmer Shir L'Yom HaShabbos. It's a day that is completely Shabbos, and it says a day meaning that whole 1,000 years is like Shabbos. So the Talmud rules basically like Rabbi Katina, who's the one who said this, that's for 1,000 years. So we have a basis that it says in the Talmud that'll be complete destruction for 1,000 years, or Chad Charuf, whatever that means. Now, there's been lots of discussion what exactly that means. Some say that it means literally, that's what it means, that it's going to be, ultimately the world will return to a state of nothingness, be destroyed, and so on. Others say that it's part of the world, and others say that it's more figuratively. And then another part, some actually explain that now you say that it's going to be for 1,000 years, and one's going to be ruin and destruction. So does that mean it's one after the 6th, meaning the 7th millennium, or is it one of those 6,000? Interestingly, there's one commentator, Demiri, he lived in the 13th century. He explains, on the contrary, it actually means one of the 6th millennium, so meaning the last 1,000 of the 6,000 years. It means it's going to be in ruins, meaning the world is going to be in a place that the Jews are going to be persecuted. It's going to and so on, but it doesn't actually mean destruction. But this is what we would say within the Jewish scholars, the rabbis. So there's the I don't know how we want to term it. There's the more literalist or Talmudic or rational, however you want to refer to them, and then there's the more mystical side, the Kabbalists. The Kabbalists actually explain that this is not actually referring to any physical destruction. Or just to quote the Tzemach Tzedek, who points out that while Rabbi Katina said that the world will be desolate in the 7th millennium, if you read it literally, we also have many places that it compares the world, the 6,000 years as the 6 days of the week, and then the 7th day is like the Sabbath. Right. God rested. So too the 6,000 years where whatever was going on in the 7th millennium will be Sabbath, will be the Messianic era. And therefore, the Kabbalists actually explain that it doesn't mean that it'll be actually, Chad Charuf doesn't mean that the world will be destroyed, but it'll be in a period that it will be sort of like the Messianic era, that it'll be a millennium that it'll be desolate from physical things, and we'll just need spiritual needs and so on and so forth.
Rabbi, I'm going to let you take a breath there for a second, and in a certain, I'm going to try my somewhat blunt hand as a layman at summarizing a couple of points. It seems that, at least in the Hasidic tradition, that Judaism is less focused on kind of the destruction of the world and more on its elevation, and that also there's a more of a mystical understanding of some of, as opposed to a literal historical understanding of some of this eschatology and some of the references in Book of Daniel and elsewhere. And as I understand it, in this mystical understanding, it's the idea that the origin of the world is reproduced to some extent at the end of the world. That is, like, the process of creating order out of chaos that occurred at the beginning of time also occurs at the end of time. It's at a spiritual level as well. Is that a fair way to kind of think about at least the Hasidic view of some what otherwise can sometimes be very troubling and very particular descriptions of horrible events and destruction?
I would say yes, but more than that, because if it's just merely to go back to how things were, then there's really no point of creation. So part of it is to get to actually a greater and a higher level than the world was at the beginning of creation. So yes, but more than that. Right.
So that's that. Would it be fair in a general sense that to qualify that as the kind of a heavenly kingdom or a messianic kingdom that exists in end times?
Yeah. And I should say that everybody would agree that there's the Messianic era. In other words, all Jews would agree that there's a Messianic era, which is a time of peace and tranquility and no wars and so on. Another key point, which is this is not talking about the apocalypse, but I think it's connected, which is about the Messianic era. So there's differences of opinion, most famously between Maimonides and Nachmanides. They debate about what would be the ultimate reward. Is it souls embodied? In other words, the soul and body of people living in this world, or is the ultimate reward will be souls outside of the body? Maimonides holds that the ultimate reward will actually be the souls will be in the world to come, without their bodies, basking in the glory of God. Well, this would be in a time after the Messianic age. There'll be another after the Messianic age, after the resurrection. There'll be the ultimate reward will be not in a body. Nachmanides, and I should point out that all the Kabbalists, basically follow Nachmanides' view, that says, no, the ultimate reward will actually be a soul in a body, because it's, after all, in the end of the day, it's the soul together with the body that worked throughout this 6,000 years, this time of exile, that worked and observed the mitzvahs, followed God, and so on and so forth, and therefore the reward has to be both of them together, and that is the ultimate reward. Right. So there's a differences of opinion exactly how it will look at the end, but they will still hold about the Messianic era before that. That there'll be era of no wars and peace and so on.
So we're going to need to take our next break. So Dr. Leonard, Rabbi Sherpin left for you the some of the juicy bits in terms of talking a little bit about for those we can't do a show like this and not at least talk about some of the references to the apocalypse in Daniel and elsewhere, but we'll get to that after the break. Dr. Robert Leonard, Rabbi Yehuda Sherpin, thanks for joining us talking about eschatology, the study of last things in the Abrahamic faith. We'll be right back. Faiths.
Don't wanna close my eyes. I don't wanna fall asleep 'cause I miss you, baby. And I don't wanna miss a thing. 'Cause even when I dream of you.
Equal Footing with Dove Tusman is sponsored by MDCS Dermatology, your experts in skincare. With 2 Manhattan locations and 4 offices in Long Island, including Plainview and Commack, the dermatologists and skincare surgeons at MDCS are proud to be affiliated with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and New York Presbyterian Hospital. So schedule your next skin exam in one of MDCS's convenient New York area locations. To make an appointment, go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-DERM. That's 212-661-3376. You could even schedule a virtual video visit with MDCS's board-certified dermatologists from the comfort and safety of your own home. So go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-3376. And don't forget to mention Equal Footing for 15% off all cosmetic procedures.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to.
You're back on Equal Footing, and we're talking about end times. Dr. Robert Leonard, can you help us understand the difference when people talk about the animal apocalypse and the historical apocalypse, or the apocalypse of weeks? Whether they're talking about that in the framework of Jewish eschatology or Christian eschatology, which of course also references books from the Jewish texts. What are they talking about? What is the animal apocalypse, and what is the apocalypse of weeks, or the historical apocalypse?
So I have to say, I've never actually heard those terms, but I infer from what you said that the animal apocalypse, you're referring to the prophecies in Daniel. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, my understanding is it's around like the 4 beasts and the 4 kingdoms and so forth. So the 4 beasts of Daniel chapter 7 are, by the way, reflected also in the New Testament book of Revelation. And the way we interpret, at least the way my church, my particular denomination interprets it, using a framework that we technically call dispensational premillennialism. And so the way we look at it is that the first 3 beasts talked about in Daniel refer to the Babylonians historically. Alexander and the Macedonians, and then the Media-Persia Empire before Alexander. So it would be Babylon, Media-Persia, and then Alexander. And then the 4th beast representing Rome. Now, the reason that's really significant to us is because that particular prophecy jumps all the way from the ancient world into the future, because because there's essentially 2 parts to Rome. There's ancient Rome, and then there's eschatological Rome. So we believe that Rome is the big bad guy in the tribulation, in the 7-year tribulation that is coming, and that Rome will be revived as described in Daniel chapter 7 and implied in Daniel chapter 2 as well. So, so that part is very relevant to what we believe in terms of eschatology. Yeah, and I understand it. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I understand that the historical apocalypse view is more based on kind of a an idea of divine intervention at kind of the end of days. So these things are less metaphorical, like the four beasts could represent, four different kingdoms and so forth, but more literal. And I'm interested in particular in a reference, I think it's in the book of Daniel, Dr. Leonard, I could be wrong, in one of these messianic and apocalyptic books, about this idea that there's a rock that is not hewn from man's work that will kind of bring a destruction to the fourth kingdom. And there's been a lot of speculation. It goes through popular culture with movies like Armageddon and so forth, that this is an asteroid that hits Earth. Do I have that right? Is that a Book of Daniel reference?
Yes, that's Daniel chapter 2. It's a wonderful episode and exciting to read. And it's basically Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about a huge statue, and the statue has a golden head, and then it has a chest of silver, and then it has legs and thighs of iron, and then at the bottom of the statue is iron mixed with clay in his feet and his toes. And Daniel, the great hero of this book, not only tells him that he had this dream, which amazes Nebuchadnezzar, but then he tells him what it means. And he says, the head of gold is you. You're the head of gold, Babylon. And then after you is going to come another kingdom. He's referring to Media Persia. And then after that comes another kingdom, and that's, ultimately going to be Rome. And then our belief, our interpretation of that is that the rock that is cut out, but not by human hands, is a reference to the Messiah. And God will use the Messiah to crush revived Rome, and the whole thing will collapse, as everything will collapse there. That entire, idol essentially will collapse and give way to the rulership of the Messiah, whom we believe is Jesus Christ.
I see. So, these books are rife with these types of references that can be, that are open to so many different types of interpretations. On this note, let's dive into some listener questions. There's some good ones. Rabbi, let's start with one that's a little bit more, high-minded. And I think it's an interesting one given the course of the conversation, so far. So Ellie in Crown Heights is asking, why is it that it seems that as Jews, we're less open to discussing the apocalypse, less open to discussing end times than Christians? And I don't know about Muslims. So, Rabbi, it seems in a certain sense that that's proven a bit by this conversation, where the Jewish eschatology, at least as you're articulating it, is, relies more on the mystical and metaphorical meaning. Do you think this listener, is Ellie from Crown Heights, right? Are we more recalcitrant in our community about talking about apocalypse or end times?
I think yes, but we're qualified yes, because we do talk a lot about the Messianic era. We pray every day for the Messianic era. We 3 times a day at least. So we actually, and people every time they finish a speech or they're talking, we're always praying and blessing that Mashiach should come, and we will discuss at times what will happen then. So it's not. So you really have to differentiate, are you talking about Armageddon and the apocalypse, or are you talking about the Messianic era, which is how I started off, that we really have to differentiate when we're talking about eschatology, what exactly are we referring to. Now, I think part of the reason for this is that, as I was saying, that we really look at it more, and this seems to be the more mainstream view, I would say. Even not the Kabbalists, who say Chad Karov would be literal, but they too are not saying about a total destruction of the world and the nuclear wars and half the world destroyed and so on and so forth. So we don't really look at it as a catastrophe that the whole, that's going to happen at the end of times, and more we look at it in a more positive way, as a time that finally the world will be more refined. The wolf shall lie with the lamb. There will be no more war, and so on and so forth. So that's really how we look at it.
The swords will be beaten to plowshares. The nations will not rise against each other, etc. In this period. Right.
So we don't really. So the Armageddon and apocalypse in the common sense of the word is not really. We don't really focus on that because we don't we don't really in our belief, it's not really going to be as it's pictured in other religions.
So, Ellie, maybe the answer to your question is we certainly are open to talking about the end times, but more in the concept of the conclusion and the elevation in the Messianic period, as opposed to the destruction maybe right before. Rabbi, one more quick question for you, then we got a couple for you, Dr. Leonard. This is a listener, doesn't list his or her name, but is saying that there should be a literal reading of Ezekiel 38 around the war of Gog and Magog. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Why don't we read this literally? Can you shed some light on this, Rabbi? First of all, what is this listener referring to? And do we have a literal, what's your view on the theology behind it?
Oh, so like all good things, there's differences of view, and it's not, there's difference, there's differences of opinion. Is Gog and Magog, is it the names of people? Or
first of all, help listeners that might not know the passage. What's going on there in Ezekiel 38?
Okay, so Ezekiel 38, so it talks about in the end of, towards the end of time, there'll be a war. We actually, for those listeners, it's actually we just read it in the Haftorah. We read it so on the holiday of Sukkot. So we actually just read it. We just read the war about the war of Gog and Magog. It said there'll be a war of Gog and Magog. Everybody will be terrified.
Kind of like the war of the end of times, like an Armageddon.
Right, like an Armageddon, and everybody and the Jews will be frightened. What's going to happen? And then they're going to come to Jerusalem. I'm keeping it general because while I guess the questioner wants to read it in a literal sense, and that is how many do say that it's talking about. Many also say that it's not in a literal sense. And many say we don't. We don't know if it's a spiritual war. We don't know if it's a physical war. Whether it's the names of nations or it's the names of people. And in fact, according to Maimonides, it's possible that this will happen after the Messianic era already started, like towards the beginning. Maybe it's not going to be right before. So I'm just getting to the question of the person who asked the question. So it's really not. I mean, you could try to translate it literally, but I'm not sure that it's gonna help you that much.
Dr. Leonard, we got one for you. This is a tough one. You got a couple of tough ones here. A listener is asking about. We made reference to Enoch, this book that is found at the Dead Sea Scrolls, and now archaeologists believe that it is contemporaneous with the Book of Daniel, which is around from the 2nd century BCE and so forth. And in Enoch, there's a reference to it's also called a part of it called the Book of Watchers. And this listener would like us to talk about the Book of Watchers. Can you do that, Dr. Leonard?
If you're talking about what we call the Book of Enoch, and that is, we don't consider that a canonical book, but of great interest, because it deals with, and I just want to make sure I'm dealing with the same book that you're talking about. It deals with the issue of the Nephilim and the Genesis 6 incident where the sons of men came into the sons of God came into the daughters of men and created this sort of a hybrid race, the Nephilim, the fallen ones. And then Enoch.
That's right. Yes, that as I understand it, that's what they're referring to.
Yeah, Enoch talks a lot about that. I'm not sure that I can answer the exact question you asked, but it's a fascinating question to give to me because my wife's fictional book series, The Goliath Code, is about exactly that. It's about exactly that scenario, except that it happens in the end times too. So anyway, but I don't want to distract you. So the question is, we, from a Christian standpoint, we don't, I would say that most mainline Christians, reject the Book of Enoch for one reason or another, although we think it's an interesting book. And the way that some Christians interpret Genesis 6, including me, is very much informed by the Book of Enoch, because we do believe that there was an actual hybrid race created. It's essentially a half angelic, half human race that's created in Genesis 6, and this is what leads to the flood.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think, about the Book of Enoch, which ironically, although rejected, as you say, by mainstream Christianity, there's increasing anthropological and archaeological evidence that it was part of the Jewish canon at the time. And, what's interesting is that it occurs before the flood. And so the flood is a certain kind of an Armageddon, not an Armageddon, but it's an apocalypse of its own sort, right? And so it's a question of whether these things come in cycles. And thank you. I love live radio because it's real time. I've been instructed by a listener that my reference to the apocalypse of weeks actually does come from the Book of Enoch. I can't say this is true, guys. I'm just reading what a listener writes. That's an instruction of Enoch to his children based on what he had seen in the heavenly books. And in this case, the history is divided into periods that are called weeks. You can compare it to Daniel 9. Thank you, listener. Yeah. Thank you for that. All right. You ready for another really tough one here? Yeah. Dr. Leonard. Okay.
Sure. I agree with that point about Daniel, because in Daniel 9, as soon as you said the eschatology of weeks, I immediately thought of Daniel 9, because that's where you get the enumeration of the 70 weeks of years, which is extremely significant in Christian eschatology. So I agree with that. Go ahead.
Got it. So, there's so much to study here. And so folks that are interested, just, plugs to read the book of Daniel, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Enoch, and I guess in the Christian tradition, the book of Revelations. For someone who is interested in the Islamic, faith, what's like the crib sheet? What should you read to get into Islamic eschatology? And then I have another question after the next break on Islamic eschatology. But what's like the prime book to reference there, or portion of the Quran or whatever?
Right. So the Quran, has about a third of it has to do with eschatology. However, it really doesn't say it doesn't give us a lot of details, other than there's going to be a final judgment, and it's a constant warning that final judgment is coming. So where then do you go for Islamic, more detailed eschatology? And the answer is you go to the Hadith literature, which is not in the Quran, but it was developed later, like in the 9th century and stuff. It's essentially medieval literature written by Islamic scholars, the Hadith literature, and some of those are very specifically about eschatology, and they go into great detail as to exactly what is going to happen and when it's going to happen. And essentially, it points out, it enumerates the greater signs and the lesser signs. The greater signs being the arrival of Jesus, son of Mary, the arrival of the Mahdi, the slaying of Ad-Dajjal, which is their Antichrist, and the 7-year rule of the Mahdi. Those are the bigger signs. And the lesser signs are more generic, and they're very open to interpretation. Things like there'll be an increase in fornication, an increase in lying, this kind of thing, which you could easily apply that to any time in human history. So, but anyway, that's the short answer is the Hadith literature is where you want to look at.
Gotcha. We're going to go to our next break, but I'm going to give you a chance to think about this listener's question, which I'm going to summarize. It's like 2.5 paragraphs long, Dr. Leonard. And this listener is saying that we're missing the boat, that really this is more of a historical and political issue around the early messianism and some of the eschatological concepts we're getting into. And this listener posits that really we're talking about a period in the Hellenistic Judaic period where there's a messianic ferment, including the writings of Flavius Josephus, as well as what we now call the New Testament, the appearance of prophets like John the Baptist and Jesus, and that this comes to a climax in the first Jewish revolt against Rome in 66 in the Common Era, and then the destruction of the Second Temple of Jerusalem by the Romans, and that really this messianism is effectively kind of an anti-imperialism, and that is really what this is about, and less so an apocalyptic kind of spiritual lesson. That's to you, Dr. Leonard, after the break. We'll be right back talking about the end times, Eschatology 101, study of last things in the Abrahamic faiths. We'll be right back.
It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine.
There's no good transition for this sponsor. But nevertheless, it's a wonderful sponsor for Equal Footing and sponsor for some time. I guess the transition would be, if you think we're talking about something difficult to talk about tonight, uncomfortable, maybe makes you a little uncomfortable, but it helps you at least think about how to address it with others. And I think that's true around this topic tonight. It's a juicy and weird and controversial topic, this end times, the apocalypse, even how we interpret the Messianic era. Well, the same can be said around issues that challenge emotional life issues within couples. And one of the things that can cause discomfort and sometimes shame, and needs to be addressed is erectile dysfunction. That's right. It's being unable to have enjoyable sex. It's not anything to be ashamed about. It affects about 2/3 of men in their lifetimes. And there are options out there where you can go and get a consult and look at various treatments and remedies that are not just based on a blanket prescription of those expensive blue pills. And the pills that are used for erectile dysfunction are often not available to many people because of comorbidities and side effects. You got to call Manhattan Medical and discuss their new effective therapy for erectile dysfunction. It's called Gainswave. And when I say new, it's only relatively new in the United States, but it's been used in Europe and even in Canada for many years to excellent results. The Gainswave therapy methodology for erectile dysfunction is non-invasive, it's surgery-free, and it's painless. And you do not have to be in Manhattan. You do not have to be in the New York area. Anywhere in the United States, you can get a teleconsult. So call Manhattan Medical. I'm going to give out the number a couple times. 888-ED-CURE-9. That's 888-ED-CURE-9. In numbers, 888-332-8739. Manhattan Medical's Gainswave therapy can help patients that have not had luck with any other erectile dysfunction remedies. If you mention that you heard about Manhattan Medical's Gainswave therapy for ED on the Equal Footing program, you'll get a free consultation, and that's worth $250, and you only get it if you mention that you heard the ad on Equal Footing. So call Manhattan Medical about their Gainswave therapy for erectile dysfunction, 888-332-8739. That's 888-332-8739.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to.
All right, Dr. Leonard, before the break, Esther, I don't think I said her name. Esther from Pomona, New York, has challenged us that this isn't really a discussion around theology. This whole messianic ferment and this discussion of the end times was rooted in an anti-imperial millennial ideology culminating in a major uprising against the Roman occupation of Judea and Galilee in around 66 to 70 in the Common Era. Is this listener right, Dr. Leonard? Are you vibing her?
Well, I will say, first of all, I think she's well educated in the literature, and she brings up a very important point, and one that has a lot of good scholarly respect behind it. There is a whole, many schools of biblical interpretation for both Old and New Testament that question, the timing of, the relevance and timing of various passages. For example, the book of Daniel, many will sort of dismiss Daniel as being not prophetic, but rather talking more about the time of the Maccabean revolt around the time of Antiochus IV and the problem with the Seleucids and so on. So she's absolutely right that these kind of interpretations have been there, all along. The book of Revelation, which we would view as a very highly prophetic book, there are many Christians who will look at Revelation and say, no, Revelation is really historical. It's about the history between the Catholic Church and the Protestants, or even before that, it's just basically about the history of good versus evil. So you'll always have, schools of thought, well-respected schools of thought, that view eschatological literature in that way. I personally don't accept it.
Through a historical or political lens.
Right.
Yeah.
Because as an example, the reason I do not accept it, Jesus himself in Matthew 24, when he was discussing how to interpret the book of Daniel, he said therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So clearly, Jesus did not look at the book of Daniel as talking about history. He saw Daniel was talking about something that was yet future. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Dr. Leonard, one more question here, and then I want to give you guys both a chance to wrap up with meaning. So, Amir writes that we're not talking enough about Islamic end of times, and in Islamic end of times, there's lots of unnatural phenomenon, frequent sudden deaths, excessive lightning, destructive rainfall, terrible drought, a huge cloud of smoke, opening up of huge cracks in the earth, the sun rising in the west, etc. So this listener, to summarize, saying that we haven't talked about that. That's unique to to Islamic eschatology. Is that right, Dr. Leonard? We didn't talk about that. Is that something that only appears in Islam?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, he's referring to the numerous lesser signs that are discussed in some of the Hadith literature, and then is interpreted more in a modern sense since 1967, when there was a big upswing in Muslim interest in eschatology, and a whole plethora of new authors came out and began to, sort of sensationalize the topic, essentially because of the war with Israel and so forth. But, he's right. There is a lot to talk about in Islamic eschatology, and I wish we did have the time to develop it. But there's also a natural phenomenon talked about in both the Tanakh and in the New Testament, in the Christian New Testament as well. So that's fairly common, yeah.
Let's end on a brighter note. We're going to have a future show. We're going to talk about the kind of political and social and foreign policy implications of all this. But let's just for a minute or two each, because we're almost out of time. But Rabbi, this is kind of riffing on a question and comment that I got from a listener as to why this is all important. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to the kind of to the heart of listeners and why is it, or is it important to think about the end of times in our daily life? Is eschatology something that we should be interested in spiritually?
So that's actually an interesting question, because Maimonides, in the conclusion of his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah, so in the last two chapters, that's where he talks about the Messianic era. So he actually says over there, he gets into the details, the different opinions, whether Elijah the prophet, who's going to herald the redemption, is going to come before the Messiah comes, or is going to come afterwards. And then he says that the getting into the details of all these questions, whether it's going to be before or after, is not really something to delve into, because we don't really actually know all the details and what actually all these prophecies mean. So therefore, he says they're hidden, and the truth is, that's just to get to something that was mentioned earlier. I've gotten this question. People propose, what is Daniel talking about? And how is the 7 weeks? What's it referring to? Which is kind of funny, because Daniel himself says that he wanted to know and he doesn't know. That God doesn't reveal it to Daniel, and you're only going to know when it actually happens. So, some of these things we don't actually know. But I do think that while we might not know the details of the prophecies, what exactly, and by definition, that's what prophecies are. They're shrouded in mystery until the time comes. But I do think the general learning about it and knowing about it in general, this is what gives people hope. This is what we're working towards. We're working towards perfecting the world, refining the world, and knowing that how the world is now is not how it's supposed to be and not how it will be. And looking at the world not in a all doom and gloom way. We're working towards the Messianic era, and know that there's a purpose in what we do in our day-to-day lives.
And I think I think we'll end on that, the idea of staying in the moment. I'll end with a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote: "Write it on your heart that every day is the best day in the year. No man has learned anything rightly until he knows that every day is Doomsday." So thank you, Dr. Robert Leonard, Rabbi Yehuda. You guys were wonderful. Rabbi Sherpin, I appreciated both of you being so open on this sensitive topic. We hope to have you back on.
'Cause it's a bittersweet symphony.